Again, I think there's something that's just innately attractive to the myth. Well, I say to fiction in general. I mean, certainly, you mentioned the entertainment industry. I think Hollywood shows how significant mythology is. You know, we've
Yes,
in
of
the
course.
past decade or so, we've seen a major resurgence in Greek mythology. You know, these tremendous blockbuster films, or you know, the slew of comic book movies. You know, comic books are modern mythology.
Yeah.
You know, you have different writers giving different treatments of the same stories or myths,
Mm.
different artists with different portrayals of the same characters. It's mythology. And people flock to these, you know, myths on the screen in droves.
Mm.
So it's obviously, you know, you can't poo-poo mythology. It's something that really, you know, taps into these things that are relevant to the human psyche. They're these sort of human stories, just writ large, you know, projected onto this cosmic canvas, this big epic canvas. And again, in a world where still, you know, you have the parties of God reigning supreme, inevitably the figure of Satan or Lucifer is going to continue to crop up. And so again, you mentioned 9/11 earlier, and that obviously was, you know, a watershed moment in the history of Western civilization. Thereafter, you get the new atheist movement, right, which says we need to actively challenge this.
You think it had that profound an impact on? Because I'm speaking from a British perspective, and I wouldn't have said that. But on the other hand, my understanding of the American psyche and the American, I suppose, religious landscape is you know, obviously far feebler than yours. So you think 9/11 really started new atheism?
I think it was under the surface, but again, I think it was that explosive moment that made it very much apparent that religion, theism, is something that really needs to be countered. Because even the religious reaction to this was to try to make American politics or culture more religious or more Christian. You know,
This is interesting because when you're saying this, because I hadn't really thought about this for quite some time, but I remember thinking that in the wake of 9/11, and like I say, in Europe there was, you know, it was a big thing, but there wasn't the same. It wasn't as seismic, obviously, as it was in the States. And I remember thinking that this was something that I thought might actually really kickstart, might really give a jolt to Satanism. And it really didn't. It didn't seem to. Whereas, you know, thinking about it now, and you're suggesting this is an interesting idea that it did for new atheism.
Well, if it didn't give a kickstart to organizational Satanism, I think it did give this kickstart to, again, what I refer to as sort of neo-romantic Satanism. So it's that cultural thing again.
Do you think there's a fertile territory between, and these terms are so between this kind of militant atheism and the kind of the new form of, you know, kind of Satanism?
Absolutely. I mean, Philip Pullman has been really overtly satanic.
Yeah, sure.
You know, in his literature and in his interviews and so on and so forth, you know, openly expressing his admiration for the Miltonic devil, and saying things like, you know, the Christian God, if he did exist, you know, ought to be rebelled against. You know, that's pretty overtly satanic. You know, and now he might not be, you know, someone who would call himself a Satanist or belong to some satanic organization, but that doesn't make that any less significant.
Yeah.
You know, just like the Romantics, you know, they weren't card-carrying members of whatever, but, you know, what they did and what they wrote and what they left behind was of tremendous importance. And so again, you do see this sort of stuff cropping up in these atheist circles, where in challenging, you know, this idea of God, not just belief in, but going back to the text, going back to the Bible.
Attacking them on home turf, effectively.
Absolutely. I think you inevitably, wind up stirring up a lot of sympathy for the devil. It's inevitable. Now, again, there are plenty of atheists who say we don't need to go there. We just need to chuck it all out. But it keeps coming back. It keeps cropping up. And I think it's inevitable, really. And I think that's a large part of what was going on in Romanticism. I definitely think you see it today. So, Gavin, and Lucifer Rising, which I guess was, like you said, your first stab at this. You mentioned Paradise Lost, as being very significant. When you wrote the Gospel of Filth and you revisited, the topic of Satanism, you had a line in there which said, if Satanism has a sacred text, it is Paradise Lost. So see, your view on the significance of Milton, or the Miltonic Lucifer, Satan, seemed to have expanded significantly. Would you say that's accurate? And if so, why might that be?
It's expanding all the time. I mean, when I think I mentioned earlier on, obviously Lucifer Rising was a book I started in the early 90s, and through various sort of the ins and the outs of the publishing industry, it didn't come out till sometime later. So it was a book that I kept, finished early 90s. Original publisher went bust, sat in the back drawer, kept working on it, and then tail end of that. So I've been living with this for a long time, and then it came out, and it did well. I was lucky to get a lot of good press for this and interest, and so talked about Satanism a lot, various media sources, and I did get to a point where I felt I'd said everything I had to say about this, and then I was writing about it again for the Gospel of Filth, the book I did in conjunction with Cradle of Filth. And there was a chapter in there on Satanism, and it quickly became apparent when I was writing this that, obviously my views had changed, evolved, you might hope. And it also occurred to me that if this is something which I still identify as a Satanist, then, there are more things to say, that Satanism has evolved. And that's another thing I think is significant. I think, religion likes to pretend that it has this golden age, these sacred texts, and that's where it starts, where it finishes, and you're trying to find the perfection of that. Satanism evolves. I mean, there's even a good argument to say that Satanism might want to evolve to the point where it's no longer necessary. So you could say it's fighting against a version, a trend within the human, the human species, within culture, whatever, that's negative, and we're trying to wipe out. And if we finally wiped it out, it's no longer necessary. It's a philosophy that's trying to destroy itself.
Right. The Promethean endeavor.
Yes, yeah.
Promethean is not, trying to enlist, humans in his worship. He's
got a job.
He's liberating humans.
He has a job to do. Yes.
From the the reign of the gods. So, which includes him, which is significant.
Another slightly tangential thing. Book I'm working on at the moment, which is a book of describing it as a satanic source book. So it's a whole bunch of documents going back to the roots of religion in sort of Mesopotamia up to contemporary manifestations of Satanism or ersatz Satanism in Egypt and Russia, and a whole dipping into this as sort of all sorts of nice ideas or kind of tangents that come from that, and one of them is the idea that that Christianity is the first one. You have a lot of these base religions where there's a rebellion, And so in classical mythology, you have the Titans who are there first, and then the gods emerge and rebel, and they topple the Titans, and you have a new world. And you have similar versions of that in, I guess, Norse mythology and all these other mythologies. And one of the ideas that occurred to me was that is Christianity or Abrahamic religion one where the rebellion failed? So, Lucifer is like the Titans, or is like, excuse me, the wrong way around, is like the gods, and
the Olympians.
Yeah, and the rebellion fails. And so is this an example of, like, just all sorts of nice ideas that are coming out of that?